Hey guys, thank you all so much for tuning into my presentation. Just to give you all a quick overview, the initial part of my presentation will highlight what I thought were the important takeaways and the facts supporting those takeaways. After that, I'll discuss if I felt the article was outdated and how it applies to our lesson for this week. And lastly, I'll discuss how I can apply this newfound knowledge to on-the-job situations. So sit tight and enjoy. The title of my article is called Lessons Premier Hospitals Learned About Implementing Electronic Health Records. The authors are Susan Day Verrell and Keith Viglioli. And of course, it is narrated by moi, Jalecia Smith. Here are the key points, aka takeaways, that the article discussed. First, we'll be setting the scene. Next, we'll have Lesson 1, the challenge of cultural changes. Lesson 2, the value of clinical champions. Lesson 3, a need for medical staff training. Lesson 4, how to integrate alerts and reporting of measures. Lesson 5, rigorous security. Lesson 6, clear policies to document communication. Lesson 7, flexible budgets. And of course, a conclusion, also known as a note of optimism. Before we get into the key points of the article, I wanted to give a simple summary of what this article is about. Under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the HITECH Act pushed the implementation requirements needed to qualify for federal funding. However, these requirements did not address the gray areas associated with implementation. Luckily for us, however, we are in an age of trial and error where we're able to learn from the successes and failures of others. This article really highlights lessons learned from the EHR Implementation Best Practices Library, created by the Premier Healthcare Alliance. So, the Premier Healthcare Alliance is a national network of 2,300 nonprofit U.S. hospitals. They surveyed its members to review the lessons learned from implementation. They created a best practices library that outlines areas that should be considered before and during implementation. The first lesson learned was the challenges of cultural change. One might assume that cultural change may not serve as much of a challenge in implementation. However, cultural changes have proven to be far more challenging than technology issues or budgetary concerns. Health information technology implementation will not be successful if strong consideration is not given to managing the unique qualities and personalities of users involved. Since health IT implementation deviates from the normal business of the healthcare organization, the process requires behavior changes from all healthcare workers. The authors do note that it is important to see the efforts as an exercise in change management rather than an IT initiative. Some things to consider from a senior leadership standpoint is a gradual rollout. You want to avoid the too much too soon reaction. Next, implement open forums for users to weigh in with any concerns or objections they may have. Lastly, make usability the main goal. So it is simple to do the right thing and challenging to do the wrong thing. The next lesson is the value of clinical champions. Management leaders must recruit clinical champions like physicians, nurses, and members of the senior medical leadership. These individuals should be involved in every phase of the process. This includes design input, workflow sign-off, and live support. Clear, regular communication from the top levels of management is imperative to spur adoption of technology and workflow change. With that being said, multiple channels of communication should be conveyed or be used, such as emails, newsletters, and face-to-face meetings. Lesson 3 highlights the need for medical staff training. The research has shown that hands-on health IT training for medical staff is far more effective than the classroom style of education. Because of the technical education requirement, the hospitals found that it was more effective to have trainers shadow physicians so that questions could be answered on the spot. There are many benefits to using this approach. For example, the users receive on-the-job training where they're expected to translate the lessons learned into clinical practice. Also, trainers are able to document questions and technical issues as they happen. Lastly, by putting the technology to use in clinical practice, physicians are more likely to realize the benefits early and will promote the tool. And we want physicians to promote these tools. Lesson 4 involves integrating alerts and reporting of measures. Reporting of quality measures and alerts should be integrated into any implementation effort. In order to gain buy-in from the clinical staff, the technology needs to be linked to quality and safety goals. To do this, thought must be given to the linkage between clinical decision support, order sets, and quality reporting to ensure the evidence-based care is reinforced. And when I say order sets, I do mean orders associated with specific procedures. The next lesson talks about rigorous security. The first step towards successful security policy is to implement procedures to respond to and report incidents along with post-incident analysis that can measure the effectiveness of the policy. A rigorous security plan needs to be designed that includes procedures for responding to security incidents and threats. Also, an incident response plan that is regularly updated to reflect the lessons learned so that policies are continually strengthened to address current and emerging threats. Another policy that should be put in place is a policy specific to mobile and handheld devices, just because we all know that our generation is glued to our mobile devices. Lesson 6 says policies are needed to document both informal and special forms of communication that may need to be documented in the EHR. Surveyed hospitals reported that care must be taken to address unofficial forms of documentation such as sticky notes or work lists that are not a part of the medical record. It is important for hospitals to examine why staff members are using these informal methods and determine whether there is a communication gap. Informal arrangements and shared understanding among the clinical team must be confronted. Lastly, Lesson 7 states that it is key to take a broad view of the budget to avoid being surprised by the total cost. The budget should be built in order to account for the unexpected. Usually, budgets are not able to fund the indirect costs of implementation, which include infrastructure applications to optimize workflow, user or staff time to participate in design and training, needed upgrades, and fine-tuning. The budget must be able to address last-minute must-haves in order to be successful. To qualify for incentive payments as a part of the HITECH Act, providers must develop implementation plans that fit within the government's vision while also developing relationships, processes, and technologies that work best for their patients. A one-size-fits-all approach will not work for all organizations. In summation, these lessons can help focus implementation efforts on specific tasks required to achieve meaningful use. I felt that although this article was published in 2010, it is still pretty relevant today in 2016, especially with the proposed evolution of the different phases of meaningful use. I have provided a picture that breaks down the timeline of the phases. Also, its consideration for security for handheld and mobile devices is quite relevant to today's generation since we are such tech-savvy individuals. In this week's lesson, we are learning about the system development lifecycle, which consists of 4 stages: planning and analysis, implementation, and support and evaluation, and design. This article is great in that its lessons touch on every aspect of the lifecycle. The whole article could be used in reference to the planning and analysis stage for benchmarking purposes. When going into the design phase, it is important to remember the lesson over rigorous security. You want to design a program to include procedures for responding to security threats and incidences. It is pretty obvious that the entire article relates to implementation, and the support and evaluation phase lends itself to lesson 7 in the article, which is allowing flexible room in the budget for tech support and evaluation methods. These lessons are valuable in that they explain certain aspects of the implementation process that I did not think about. Personally, I would especially take heed to the first lesson involving cultural change because from my experience in the workplace, nothing can be successfully carried out without buy-in from the individuals of the organization. If the culture of the organization does not align with the goals of the implementation plan, then the process will never be successful. And here are my references that I used for this presentation. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great day.